Hope you're having a good morning, and it's good to see all of you. Thank you for being here. As Kim already said, we have a lot of visitors that are trying to travel away and now trying to travel back. We're thankful that you stopped with us. We wished it was under better circumstances, but we are thankful that we got to meet you. I just want to propose a question this morning and walk through it for the next few minutes. Does morality still matter, or did it ever matter in the first place? I don't think we could find anyone that would call themselves a Christian in our community that would say something like, oh, well, morality doesn't really matter. I don't think anyone would be as bold to say something like that. But I am fearful that the way we live our lives and what we argue for when we're put to the test, we really sort of do argue sometimes that morality really doesn't matter, especially even when it comes to being a disciple of Christ. There's certainly things we have to do to be disciples of Christ, but morality, that's just something that we do sometimes when we can. We don't do the extremes of immorality, but we're not trying to be the police about morality. And we sort of have this very soft response to morality. And I think that's pretty obvious why we do that. We're being affected by our world. It's just bled in. And that's what's always going to happen. The world's always going to bleed in. That's what the war is. It's trying to stop the bleeding. But I just wanted to explore that this morning. Does morality matter? Did it ever matter? And does it matter ultimately to the Christ? I really wanted to start with this and do an extreme example to try to get you to see the argument that I feel like I see and I address sometimes. And to look at an extreme of trying to find someone that called themselves Christians or called themselves disciples, but I'm pretty sure do not believe that morality matters. Trying to find some good examples of that, it wasn't too hard to do. I knew all I needed to do was get on Instagram and find people from the TV show The Bachelor or The Bachelorette. I knew that if I could find some of them, I could probably find the easy arguments of whether morality really mattered to the Christian culture or not. And I think a lot of you have experienced this maybe in different ways, or you've seen it in different ways. And let's be painfully obvious. One thing we see a lot of times, especially on social media sites, we see a lot of people that are selling pics of their body for clicks. That's kind of pretty obvious. It's some of the first things you see. And I understand that women mostly do it, but I'd also say, and it's men that mostly click on it. So we're both contributing to the problem, right? But there's a lot of people that are selling pictures of their body for imaginary likes. There's also a lot of people that are social drinkers. And you can tell from their social media sites that they're social drinkers. Anytime they're in a picture, they have something in their hand and it's not water, it's not Gatorade, what is it, you know? They're at social drinking parties like Peter talks about in 1 Peter 4. You know, you see a lot of people that use filthy language when they're angry at others. And you don't have to go too far from a reality TV show to see people that claim, you know, that they're faithful, devout people that really care about God. But my goodness, you say something ugly to them, they're going to curse you out. And even ABC's having to bleep you out, right? You know, when the Disney Corporation's trying to censor you, you know you're in trouble. And that's what a lot of people are. Now, you see at someone's Instagram profile and they do all these things, they live this life, but what's on their little bio page at the top? Might say something like, I'm the daughter of the king, which is just an Instagram-y way of saying, I'm a Christian, right? And there might be male equivalents to that, but maybe I'll actually give women credit. Women are usually a little bit more quicker to boldly claim they're Christian before men are. Men try to hide that. But maybe even to these people's detriment, they'll claim that they're a Christian. You know, but they're selling their bodies for clicks. They're a social drinker. They use filthy language when they're angry at others, but they still claim that they're a Christian. Does morality matter? Does it matter to them? I don't think it does. Right? And I think it's kind of obvious. And again, this is an extreme example, but I think it's kind of obvious that they would argue that morality doesn't matter if they were really put to the test about it. And maybe they would really try to convert it really into this. And I think this is what's really being said when we claim that we're disciples or that we're Christians or we're members of the church, but we have no concept of morality. I think what we're really trying to say is, well, I do Christian rituals. That's what we really mean by saying I'm the daughter of a king, you know, or I'm a disciple of Christ. And some of them got Proverbs 31 like on the info page, right? I do Christian rituals is what's really being said. And of us that have read the Bible, or at least parts of the Bible, maybe we can spot pretty quickly that doesn't really mean being a Christian. It's just doing Christian rituals, right? I go to church, or I keep up my membership somewhere. I go and I take the Lord's Supper somewhere. We pray before our meals. All of those things are wonderful. But those are just Christian rituals. That isn't necessarily what makes a disciple, right? We would go quickly to Saul's story. Remember, Saul was given a command by God in his war with Amalek, and basically tells him, wipe everything out. But what does Saul do instead? Well, old King Saul decides he's going to keep some of the best, and he's going to take them back to Israel. And on his way, Samuel's late, but on his way, Samuel finds them and says, why haven't you obeyed the voice of the Lord? Well, what's Saul's story? Saul's story is, well, actually, I was just going to offer all these things to God. I was going to make this big, grand sacrifice to God once I got them all back home. And what was Samuel's very to-the-point response? It's here in verse 22. So Samuel said, as the Lord has great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as in obeying the voice of the Lord. Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, and stubbornness is iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. It's very to the point. And Samuel's like, look, rituals or faith rituals are important. They're good and all. However, God does desire obedience more than he desires the fat of rams. He desires heeding his word more than he desires these sacrifices. Because at the end of the day, what are the rituals if there isn't a broken, contrite heart doing the rituals? The rituals are nothing. And we were talking about on Friday, we did Psalm 51 together, if y'all were part of that. And David quotes Samuel and says, Lord, I already know that you desire broken, contrite hearts more than burnt offerings. Where did David learn that from? Well, he learned it from Samuel. And so if we try to say, well, I'm a Christian because I do the rituals, not that I'm a Christian because I'm a disciple and I do my best to learn and obey from God, well, then that's not a Christian at all, right? So right here, does morality matter? I think Samuel would say that morality matters, right? And we can continue that thought. Maybe there's other passages we would go to make the point that morality does matter to be a disciple. John 14:15, Jesus says this to the apostles, but it's certainly carried over to us. If you love me, keep my commandments. That's pretty on the head too. It's to the point. If you really love Jesus and you have on your Instagram bio that you love Jesus, well, that should imply that you're interested in keeping Jesus' commandments, right? We would even maybe add this, 1 John 2. It seems like John's even talking about what happened in John 14. John tells us, but whoever keeps his word, truly the love of God is perfected in him. By this we know that we are in him. He who says he abides in him ought himself also to walk just as he walked. There's lots of parts to this, but look at the first one in verse 5. If you keep his word, then God's love is truly perfected in you, right? And then even takes that a step further. If you say, if it's in your bio, right, that you abide in him and he abides in you, then what must that imply? That you walk as he walked. You would do things like Jesus did things, right? You would act in a way, in the same way that Jesus would act in that same way. And really, and we're going to get to this at the very end, that's all morality is. Morality is trying to shadow whatever Jesus would have done in that situation. That's the only thought there. So if I'm really going to be a disciple, well, it's not just doing Christian rituals. It's in general very broad, very bland. Just walking in the manner that Jesus would walk. Heeding the word like Jesus would heed the word. Well, if you pin someone down and you hit him with Samuel, Jesus, and John, what would be the defense, though, to continue to argue that morality really doesn't matter? Well, if you're pinned in this situation right here, I think this might be the only place you can go to. You got to go to here. It's just about being a good person. And I think maybe now, not in an extreme situation, but in an everyday situation, we probably have all heard this statement. We all have probably even have said this statement a few times to try to defend ourselves. to say, well, why didn't you practice this? Or why are you practicing this? We go, well, what's more important is we're just all trying to be good people. That's all that really morality is. It's not some big painful exercise. We're all just trying our best to be a good person. And if we do that, well, then we can say that we're daughters and sons of the King. I think the quick response to this, and the response we have to give ourselves sometimes, is Jesus was a whole lot more than just a good person. So if I'm really going to walk like Jesus walked, was Jesus just a good person? Jesus went far and beyond a good person. And if you remember on the Sermon on the Mount, what did he say sort of along those lines? If you're going to be part of the kingdom, how much your righteousness must be? Your righteousness must surpass the Pharisees. Is that being a good person? That's going beyond being a good person. John the Baptist told him the same thing at the get-go. That, yeah, you're expected to do this much, but if someone asks you to go 1 mile, what should you do? You should go with them too. That's going beyond being a good person. And his righteousness that has called us to go way beyond being a good person. That's not God's morality. That simply can't be the way we put it. And I think Ephesians puts this in perspective when Paul talks to people that I probably believe used to say they were good people, but now they've been converted to Christ and they have a totally different mindset on what it means to be a good person. Ephesians 4:17, Paul says, "This I say, therefore, and testify in the Lord, that you should no longer walk as the rest of the Gentiles walk." Before I read the rest, do you see the parallel between this and 1 John 2? You used to walk as the Gentiles walk. But in 1 John 2, how are we walking? We walk as Christ walked. It's a totally different mindset. Why did you walk like the rest of the Gentiles walk? In the futility of their mind, having their understanding darkened, being alienated from the life of God, because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their heart, who being past feeling, have given themselves over to lewdness, to work all uncleanness with greediness, right? The thought is here is that you're blind, you're being led by the blind, you're walking just like all the other Gentiles walk, and if you saw morality in front of your nose, you wouldn't even recognize it because you're not even looking for it. That's how we all used to live. And when you're somebody, selling pictures of your body for likes, and you're living in a world full of drunkenness and an abuse of never being sober, and you're living in a world that's consumed in the pursuit of greed, could you spot morality even if you saw it? I don't think you could, right? And then when someone approaches you and says, take that Christian line off your bio page, you're not a Christian, well, how are they going to react? Are they going to go, you know what, you're right, I'm not a Christian? That's how they're going to react? No, they're going to go, well, but I am a Christian. I'm a member down at this church, right? They immediately are going to defend themselves. They're not going to try to argue against you. And if you give them more verses like that Samuel line or that John line or that Jesus line, then they're going to deflect to, but I'm just trying my best to be a good person. And you're thinking, but you don't do anything good, right? What's the issue? The issue is of this ignorance that is in them. And to give these poor souls that participate on the Bachelor TV show, to give them some credit, they don't know any better. They got no idea. They don't know how to behave. They don't know what righteousness is. And I'm sure many of them have sat in a church building for many, many years. Most people in America have. But they weren't taught anything there. They were taught a Jesus that basically was a different version of Santa Claus. And you sit that here and you hear that for 20 or 30 years. Well, of course you don't know what morality is. How could you? How can you walk like Jesus walked if you don't even know how Jesus walks? And maybe the kicker here is verse 20, to work all uncleanness with greediness. But you have not so learned Christ. If indeed you have heard him and been taught by him as the truth is in Jesus. What's the solution to us understanding morality? It's to be taught Christ. And as many of us have known, because we're here, Sunday morning, this is something that's our life. We know that Christ taught a whole lot more than just to be a good person. We know that we have passages on passages that we're going to spend our entire lives looking through, trying to be more like him and to become more moral like he was more moral. We see this as a tremendous exercise. So is morality important to the true Christian? Yes, because they have learned Christ. That's the kicker. And at least in my mind, trying to have maybe a humble attitude about this, that it's not that they don't want to necessarily, even though we can all get to a place where we don't want to. A lot of it is that they're just walking like Gentiles because they don't know how to walk any different. I think Paul gave Timothy the best attitude, right? This is 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 24. Paul tells Timothy, and a servant of the Lord must not quarrel, but be gentle to all, able to teach, patient, in humility correcting those who are in opposition, if God perhaps will grant them repentance, so that they may know the truth. That's very much like Ephesians 4. So that they may come to their senses and escape the snare of the devil, having been taken captive by him to do his will. Paul tells Timothy, look, don't look at these people as these like terrible, evil, crazy people that rebel because they want to rebel. Not necessarily all of them are there. Some of them are just captives of the devil. And the solution here is just to teach them Christ and to teach them Christ's ways, and perhaps they can come to their senses and repent. And we have to take that attitude approach towards morality as well. That it's not going to be beating them over with a hammer is going to convince them about morality. It's going to be teaching them the Christ that's going to convince them of morality. And I think that's where we can put a pin in that point. Now, let me go into two other thoughts. The first thought is this. Can morality decline, though? Can it get worse? And don't picture in your mind a scale where like murder's over here and petty thefts over here, and the scale is like moving this way. I don't think God would move a scale like that. I would just think of it instead as the amount of immorality, where there's just more people that are more immoral. They do more immoral things than maybe their ancestors did or the generation before them did. And they've gotten worse. Is this possible? Well, we see it throughout the Bible several times that morality does decline. And that's the very thing that said in 2 Chronicles 28 about King Ahaz. It says, for the Lord brought Judah low because of Ahaz, king of Israel, for he had encouraged the moral decline in Judah and had been continually unfaithful to the Lord. King Ahaz is continually unfaithful to the Lord, and so what does he end up encouraging? He encourages the moral decline. And God looks at him and is like, we got to do something because the morality is dropping. It's not getting better, it's getting worse. So that obviously is very possible. Now, whose fault is it when Hezekiah inherits this kingdom on moral decline? Well, it's King Ahaz's fault. It's the generation before him that does these type of things, right? And maybe it has a little bit more of a red flag for myself and for yourself, that really the people that we influence, and I know that's not the whole world. I don't influence the whole world, but I do influence my family. I do have influence over my local church. My local church has influence on me. But that my concepts of morality and my practices of morality, what are they going to do? They're going to encourage the next generation's concepts of morality. That's just a fact. Solomon had 1,000 wives, or almost 1,000, right? That man was collecting wives like people collect coffee mugs. And if we saw 1,000 coffee mug collection, we would be in shock. That's how this man was treating women. You know, and I know we got the line that he loved them, but it obviously didn't go well. Can you imagine a scenario where David would have come back from the grave and fussed at Solomon for collecting wives like he was, and talk about the moral decline of Israel that was caused because of him collecting wives? What would have been Solomon's quick argument to stop David's complaint? Well, Dad, didn't you have 8? And David was collecting wives too. And I read the Abigail story, and I love the Abigail story. I preach about the Abigail story, but let's all face it. The writer there says that she was pretty. And next thing you know, David just so happens to decide, oh yeah, I'll just take her too. Now, by the way, she's wife number 3 at this point. The man's collecting women himself, like they're not people. How difficult would it be for David's generation to go tell Solomon's generation, y'all need to get back to the garden and do things like God originally set it up to be. It would have been very difficult. Now, I'm not saying that's not what should have happened. Of us that are parents, we do have to teach our kids things that we failed at. And when they call us out on it, what do we say? Do we say, well, I can't fuss at you? No, we go, no, I was wrong for doing that too. And you're going to know better than me. It's a different attitude. But it's very difficult when we encourage the moral decline. And now we're trying to clean it up. And what's weird is the man with the 8 wives in our scenario is angry at the son with 1,000 wives. Because how do we treat the next generation? Well, it's not that we want them necessarily to come back to the Lord's understanding of morality. We just don't want them to go as far as we did. You know, we want them to come back this far, right? It's always been interesting to me to hear sisters talk about, you know, they're trying to tell their daughters that a one-piece is okay in public, but a bikini's too far. Well, which is it? You know, because your mom used to fuss at you for wearing a one-piece in public. So how far is it going to go? Are we going to fuss at our grandchildren? What are they going to be wearing in public? What are we going to do, guys? I don't know what we're going to do. The only solution would just to come back to a sense of morality that we would believe God would be acceptable to, instead of trying to have arguments whether 1,000 wives is worse than 8 wives. You know, if I want to tell my sons, you can't talk filthy like that. You can't talk ugly about that. But it was okay when I talked ugly about those people. You know, you heard me say that, but that was okay. That was a different situation. But you can't be doing those things. What am I encouraging? Well, I'm encouraging the moral decline. Now, to give us some hope, does it always just have to decline? No, because who was King Ahaz's son? Well, it was Hezekiah. And that was a time when morality grew. And maybe it wasn't really Ahaz doing. I think the way the text read it may have been more of his mother's doing. But Hezekiah changes the common customs of Israel to become a more moral society where morality grows. Now, I think a lot of that was done by the teaching of the law. They taught the law, they restarted the temple, and now we can have conversations about what is moral and what is immoral. What does God expect and what God doesn't expect? And this would be a really grand situation. And I think all of us would argue that, you know, maybe in communities, morality has declined, but there are some aspects of morality that probably have gotten better. We would have to find those things, and I'd be interested to hear what you say. I'm not going to give suggestions because I don't want people coming up to me going, well, that's not true. But, you know, we've all had different experiences, but I think there are some things in terms of morality we do a better job of than we may have done 100 years ago, right? I'll give you one that I think is kind of protected. I don't think we're near as violent as we used to be. And there is some concern about being more peaceful. I mean, there was an Alabama preacher that used to go to Bible studies with his pistols just in case something happened. I don't go to Bible studies with weapons in case something happens. I'm not expecting anything like that. I would say that that's a moral improvement, right? Even though we may have morally declined in other places. We keep on using this word morality. I think it's past time to give a definition. Morality is a word we're borrowing from the Greeks. And the Greeks used it to talk about their homes, that their morality or their morals was their dwelling place. It was the place they were commonly found. The word habit is very similar to this, right? You know, what are your habits? It's your customs, it's your practices. But what's that root word habit also used in? It's also used in words like habitation or habitat, right? And so it's sort of all the same thought, that morality was a sense of what are your common customs? What do you usually do? What is usually acceptable for this person? The other word we would use, of course, is character, which apparently is also a root word somehow connected to all these things. And I say all this to make this point. When we're trying to chase morality, or we're preaching about morality, and we're talking about how we talk, and what we wear, and what we practice, and what we do, and we necessarily don't enjoy these sermons, but we need to do them. What are we really talking about when we're talking about morality? We're talking about God's customs. That's what we're always talking about. If morality is our customs, and we're talking about being a Christian and practicing morality, all we're talking about is trying our best to copy God's customs. This is what God would do if he was in my situation. Very similar to 1 John 2 again, right? That we would walk as Christ walked. This is what Jesus would do in my shoes. Would Jesus commit fornication? No, he wouldn't. I won't commit fornication, right? Would Jesus collect wives? No, he would not. That's why I would not collect wives, right? Would Jesus use filthy language? No, he would not. So I will not use filthy language. It's really, that's the exercise. It's simply just trying to copy God's customs. And this might be a passage that I've worn down this year, but I'm going to wear it down one more time. 1 John 3, the very beginning, and in my mind, one of our best descriptions of the promise of heaven here in the beginning of 1 John 3. We did 1 John 1, now we've done 1 John 2. Here's 1 John 3. Behold, what manner of love the Father has bestowed on us, that we should be called children of God. Therefore, the world does not know us because it did not know him. Beloved, now we are children of God, and it has not yet been revealed what we shall be, but we know that when he is revealed, we shall be like him. For we shall see him as he is. And everyone has this hope in him, purifies himself, just as he is pure. There's the application there at the end that I have a little bigger. But just to put it in perspective, behold the manner of love that God has shown us. What has he done? Well, he's adopted us to be his children. So what are we allowed to do now? This is something we talked about at the very beginning. We're allowed to be called ourselves the children of God. Wow. Y'all that come on Tuesday nights. Oh, y'all are already laughing. I taught something on Tuesday, and how many things did I drop while I was teaching? I made the point that all I do at home now is just pick up things off the ground. And so it's fitting that all I do here now is pick up things off the ground. But y'all are dads. Y'all get to see some of those grabbers with the long poles. They'll save your back. It's been really helpful. 1 John 3. The thought is that how much a loving God do we have, right? That we get to call ourselves, which is something we talked about at the very beginning. We get to call ourselves the children of God. Now, to put that phrase, daughter of a king or daughter of the king in perspective here, if you're someone that's really a disciple and you really do have a heart for all of God's commands, is it okay for you to call yourself the daughter of the king? I think you have the right to. And it was because the love of God, right? Am I allowed to call myself a son of God, little s? Yeah, I have the right to because of the manner of the love of the Father that we can all call ourselves children of God. Then you get here. The world doesn't get it, right? The world doesn't understand it, so the world tries to bleed into us instead, and that's what the war is. Verse 2, beloved, since we are children of God, it's yet now been revealed what we shall be. And then he says kind of the thought is, and I think it's implied, we don't even know really what he is. Several times in the Gospel of John, you remember the phrase being used, no one has seen the Father at any time. No one has seen the Father at any time. And even John's saying, I've never seen the Father. I've seen the Son, but I haven't seen the Father. But John says, what I'm assured of is that when we do see the Father for what he is, and it is revealed what he really is and what he really looks like, what do I know for sure? I know for sure that we will have been transformed into like him. So the thought is right now we get to call ourselves children of God, but after the resurrection, it's almost like we will literally be children of God. And that's why we'll be able to stand in his presence. That's why we'll be able to see his face. That's why we will no longer need to be shielded from his glory or holiness, because we will get to share in his glory and his holiness. And that's the reward of heaven. Now, since that's the case, what's the application in verse 3? And everyone who has this hope in him purifies himself, just as he is pure. Now, we talked about it just a moment ago. What's the concept of morality? The concept of morality is that we're just trying to be like God's version of morality. I'm just trying to take on God's habits. I'm just trying to take on God's customs. Why am I trying so hard to take on God's habits and take on God's customs? Why am I trying to purify myself in my practices? Because my hope is that one day I'll live in a world where those are the only practices possible. That I will be like God in the manner of that I will be perfect and wholly complete like God is perfect, holy, and complete. And not just spiritually, but also literally. So I practice them here because I plan on practicing them for eternity with the Father. Now, I remember being a little kid, maybe not too little. I'd probably be embarrassed how old I really was. I remember being younger. We had a gospel meeting. Preacher got up there, and I'll be honest, I was ready for the sermon to be over. He was going, and I was already lost. And I was ready for it to be done. And he said something to the effect of this. He said, listen, if you don't enjoy church, you're probably not going to enjoy heaven. Because all heaven is just a church service that goes on forever and ever. And I panicked. Because this church service was going on forever and ever. And honestly, I didn't have nightmares. And it wasn't a terrible thing, but I was concerned. I was concerned that we were going to sing God Christian, give us Christian homes in heaven forever and ever, and it was never going to end. Because you know how we like to drag that song to the ground. And we were going to sing hymns, and I was going to, not be able to escape. And y'all that know me, y'all know that I'm good for singing for about 10 songs. And I'm ready to go home or do something else. Give me 10 songs, though. I'm great for it. But, guys, I am trying to get out of singing sometimes. I enjoy them. I love them. But, man, I'm a human. My attention span is not that long. My voice doesn't go on that long. And a lot of times, guys, when we get together and we sing, there's so much hot air in the room. I'm sweating. All that hot air, it makes it hot in there. And there's a lot of things that we deal with in church services that are uncomfortable. I was going to go to that heaven, but I wasn't necessarily looking forward to it, right? Number one, I've never used that analogy. And I think the problem is that we're thinking about the uncomfortness. You can't really compare that to the comfort that these spiritual bodies will bring in God's presence. It doesn't work. It doesn't equate, right? Also, I know in heaven, I'm not going to have to listen to that guy's sermon that won't end, right? That's not the concept. If we're dealing with perfect bodies, with perfect people, I don't necessarily use that analogy. Do I think there'll be worship in heaven? Of course. Is that exactly how we do it here? I have no idea, and I'm not really concerned about it anymore. However, I will use those analogies for two other things. The first one we use a lot. If you can't get along with your brethren here, how in the world are you going to get along with them in eternity? I'll use that one. I'll wear that one out. And number two, if you don't, and I'm not saying enjoy, I'm not saying like, I'm using the word desire. If you don't desire God's morality here on this earth, why in the world would you enjoy heaven when it's going to be forced upon you? Now again, I didn't say like, I didn't say enjoy, I said desire. So instead, let me look at it like this. Why do I desire morality here on this earth? Because that's what I'm looking forward to in heaven. Why do I desire being with my brethren here on this earth? Because that's what I look forward to being with in eternity. That's why everyone who has this hope in him purifies himself, just as God is pure. Is morality important? It's of the most importance because it's part of God's very character. Thank you for your close attention. If there's anyone here that has yet to obey the gospel, it doesn't matter how much morality you exercise. It doesn't matter how hard you strive to be the best and be the greatest person you can be. Because if you're in sin, the only solution is the blood of Jesus. Now, once you receive the blood of Jesus, now what is it time to do? Well, now it is time to practice his commands and walk as he has walked. But that has to begin with salvation. And we want to help Jesus save the captives and come and find the grace of God. If there's any way we can spiritually assist, whether it be the waters of baptism or the prayers of the congregation, why don't you come forward as we stand and sing?